But what it looks like on the other side is the feeling of freedom, almost like free of your brainwashing. People describe feeling freer, lighter, more energy, more themselves. They know what they feel and think now. Because before you get disentangled, you can't think half a thought before you're feeling guilty or.
Hello and welcome back to the reMothering Masterclass and Super-Summit event. We are in step number 5 of the reMothering Roadmap Framework, which is breaking free from outdated programming that no longer serves. Before we dive in with this masterclass session, let's take a look at where we are in the flow of the event so that you can integrate everything you've learned so far and so that you can receive that repetition that's so beneficial for deeper learning. And if you're just joining us, welcome. This will get you oriented and ready for this talk. In step number 3, we looked at how to recognize our adaptations because what we can't see can and does impact us. So you learned how to spot the clues for your adaptations because what we can see, we can work with. And then in step number 4, we looked at how to deepen our connection with our inner wisdom. And you learned tools and techniques for mastering faster access to your inner wisdom and also how to discern between what is our wise inner knowing and what is outdated old programming. And building on that scaffolding, here in step number 5, you'll be learning how to break free from outdated patterns and programming that no longer serve. So that's where we are in the flow of this event. And if you are just joining us, I want you to know that each masterclass session stands alone. So if this is where you've landed, then this is where you're meant to be. And after this talk, you can always go back and watch some or all of the previous talks. In case we haven't met yet, I'd love to introduce myself briefly so that you have some context for who you're learning with. Hello, I'm Simona. My full name is Simona Vivi Haji Georgelis, and I'm the founder of reMothering.org, this space which was created to bring together the wisdom from across modalities, practitioners, and healers to be a resource for all of us on our remothering journeys. I'm also a transformational life coach over at the Center for reMothering. So if you or someone you know may be interested in coaching services, you can find me there at centerforremothering.com. So now that you're oriented, let's dive in with the next masterclass session. I'm super excited to introduce everybody. For those of you that don't know, today in this talk, we'll be talking to Dr. Lindsay Gibson. Since we last spoke, your books reached the over 1 million sold. Glennon Doyle called you, I think she called you the matron saint of our understanding of emotionally immature people. New York Times bestselling author Dr. Nicole LePera, in her book, when she talks about emotional immaturity, she references your work. So it's interesting. Part of me is surprised and part of me is not surprised because the very first time I stumbled upon your work, I was like, am I the last person to know this? And so now I'm realizing, no, there's at least 1 million of us that have these challenges with being adult children of emotionally immature parents. So I'm really excited to talk to you. So really, really excited to talk to you. So hi.
Hi, it's wonderful to be back, Simona. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And so everybody, for those of you that may recall, Dr. Gibson talked to us last year and we went deep into this book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. We talked about how to recognize emotional immaturity, some of the challenges as adults we face that ripple into our lives. So we're going to touch on that briefly in the beginning of this conversation, but I just want to let you know that Dr. Gibson's talk from last year will also be included in this year's masterclass event in case you want to go and check it out. That being said, it's not a prerequisite, so you're in good shape. We will get you here and now and ready to go from there. After we ground ourselves in the definitions of emotional immaturity and how to recognize that, I'd love for us to connect more on this book, Disentangling from Emotionally Immature People and Emotionally Immature Traps that we can fall into. And my intention there would be both to normalize it so we can recognize it and then to also offer tools. That being said, for everybody listening, we're going to go into different directions. Yes, we'll be hitting on some of the content from these books, but also we'll go into some places very specific for our remothering community. But you can go deep. Every chapter in here has strategies and tools. And so if something we touch on and you want to go deeper, there's resources. I have many, many questions. So I guess that's my first one is, can we do an overview of emotionally immature people and being as adult children of emotionally immature parents and how that ripples into our lives for a foundation for the next questions?
Sure. Yeah. Let's see. I'll try to do that briefly.
It does not be super brief.
Yeah, let's see if I can do that. Well, emotional immaturity means that there's been some kind of stuck point for a person in their emotional development. And I think of it on continuum. It's like we can develop in terms of our intelligence, in terms of our social skills, maybe in terms of our occupational skills. These are all separate lines of development. So you can have a person who is at a completely accomplished adult level in terms of their intelligence, their social skills, their work. They could be a great success. But in the realm of, or on the continuum of emotional immaturity or maturity, they have gotten stuck somewhere. And what happens is that when they get into a situation where there's some kind of stress, like unremitting stress, it's really adult stress. It's the kind of stress that doesn't go away when you pitch a fit. It just sits there and you have to deal with it over time and tolerate stress. That causes a problem for them. And also, when relationships reach a point of emotional intimacy, where sooner or later you're going to be expected to go down deeper in yourself and connect with your partner or your child or whomever in a way that is letting yourself be known and recognizing the other person for an authentic person who's having their own subjective experience. So the emotionally immature person has gotten stuck in a way that means that in these areas of stress and relationships, they're going to be at times regressing into states that are pretty much anywhere from a 2 to a 6-year-old. It's that early part of childhood where you're trying to navigate forming your own identity, individuating from your parents and becoming your own little person. But as a part of doing that, you have to start getting your batteries included. You have to start internalizing the ability to manage anxiety, to regulate your feelings, to get along with other people. There's a lot that goes on in that early period of childhood. And a lot of people, for many different reasons, don't make it through that unscathed. So,
Well, I'll add on a side note, most of us don't make it through unscathed.
well,
So there are
yeah, yeah. Well, it is a continuum. It is a continuum, and I just want to reassure people because people always, worry about this. They come back and they say, "Oh, I did this thing, and does that mean I'm emotionally mature?" But if you are tired, if you're sick, if you're really stressed, we all slide over into more emotionally immature behavior because our emotional regulation takes energy and we lose energy when we get sick, tired, or stressed. So we kind of slide across into the emotionally immature range. And then, of course, the emotionally immature person on a great day when they're feeling well resourced, when there's something they really, really want, okay, they can pull it up and kind of raise their level, their apparent level of emotional maturity. And really, people interact with a version of them that is much more mature than what they can sustain. They're kind of like Gumby. They stretch to meet the demands of the situation, but they can't hold it there. So sooner or later, they revert to form. So that being said, let's look at a few characteristics of emotional immaturity because there are some places on that continuum that are really kind of hallmark places where if you're having trouble with that, the chances are really high that there is a more entrenched kind of emotional immaturity. And the first one, as you know, Simona, is egocentrism. This
This
is
one blew my mind when we spoke last year. So blew my mind.
well, it's
Yeah.
if you in your own emotional development have moved past this point, it's really hard to believe that people are so much this way. It's really hard for you to believe that there was a time when you didn't know how to tie your shoes. I can't even recreate the experience of looking at my shoelaces and not knowing what to do. So once we get these things developed in ourselves, they don't go away and we don't regress back into a form of that previous to what we had developed, except under the most extreme kinds of circumstances. And then it's only temporary because we come
It's
back, bounce back.
it's interesting. I was thinking of you. I had this very funny experience. A friend of mine has a lot of children, and their youngest children, I think I can't remember how old she is, 2 or 3, and we were visiting with them. And as I was getting ready to say goodbye, I was like, and we had so much fun. We did this and we did that. And I was listing the different things we'd done over the time. We had dinner together last night and we looked at the stars. And she was like, wow, how do you remember all those things from way back then? And I thought what you told me when you shared with me, they have language and they can communicate so clearly, but they're not as developmentally mature as their language skills let you think they are. And when she said that, I thought of you.
Yeah, that's the absence of a complex internal structure. I mean, she hasn't developed that yet. So it's
Yeah.
like she doesn't have all these little nooks and crannies and, places where you can put things because she doesn't have a really fully organized interior world yet that's organized by feeling, experience, memory. She hadn't got that yet. For her,
Yeah.
she's in the eternal now still.
So what it really highlighted for me was something you said last year, which is when adult people who have emotional immaturity, what they have is they have language skills that make you think that they're understanding you. They make you, because their language skills are so developed, you believe that they're having the same conversation that you're having. And then you realize, well, I didn't actually fully realize until you said this last year that they actually do not have the capacity. They have an empathy deficiency and a lack of ability to truly see the world through another perspective other than their own. And it, yeah, I was flabbergasted then, and it's a very interesting piece of information to realize it's not that they're ignoring you or that you have to explain it any more clearly than you've explained it.
Right.
It's just they don't have the capacity to understand.
Exactly. And yet, like you say, they're using the same words. So
Yes.
you just assume they mean the same thing by those signals, but not if you're different in terms of your internal development. Yeah, so you just raised a really important one. It comes right after egocentricity, and that is the poor empathy and the inability to put themselves in somebody else's shoes. They just don't do that. Doesn't mean that they absolutely cannot, but in order for them to be more empathic, they've got to be in a really good place inside themselves. They've got to be kind of topped off, filled up. Things are going their way, kind of energized state in order to have that little bit of extra to show some empathy. But it doesn't stick. And it certainly doesn't stick when they get stressed or they get opposed. Because
Opposed, that's a really powerful word. I just want to underline opposed because that's fascinating to me. It all is groovy if you're following the script,
yeah,
but opposed is another story.
yeah. And oppose hits right at that egocentrism thing. It's interesting because you would think maybe differently, but being egocentric does not mean that you can self-reflect. In fact, it's the opposite of self-reflection. Because in self-reflection, you have developed enough of a organized self. You've become enough of a complex individual that there's a part of you that's able to kind of stand off to the side and look at you with some objectivity, or look at yourself with some objectivity. And the self-reflection comes in when you do that and you say, I wonder if I caused part of that problem. Or maybe I shouldn't have said that. Or, oh, geez, I bet they're really upset with me now. Because there is that ability to step out of your immediate moment and look back on something and reflect on it. That's what you were doing with that child. You were stepping back from your immediate experience with her and having fun saying, look at all these things that we did. And she's, what are you doing? How do you do that? It's like magic. Because for a little kid, that reflection on what you've done, that's that's way beyond their pay grade. They are not at that point.
So
Yeah.
I wonder if I could maybe share a story to wrap up what I've heard you say so far, and then we'll see where we are and if it feels like a good segue point or if there's more to say. So I'll share this. I have permission from this person to share the story, but I'm not going to share anything that's identifying of this person. But this person's father passed away unexpectedly. So people were gathering. One of the family members brought a new partner. And so there was a lot going on. So this person was sharing that they were focused on their mother who had just lost their spouse unexpectedly. They were focused on their children who just lost their grandfather, and a lot going on. And so did not spend nearly any time, perhaps no time, in introducing themselves or talking to this family member's partner. And so the blowback was that this new partner got very upset that no one paid attention to them and that they weren't warm to them and all this just drama. And so tying back together this story, if we do some self-reflection, anyone can understand why, if you're in a group setting and you're feeling not warmly welcome, that's going to ping some feelings. But I think what we're saying here is that emotional maturity would be like, wow, I'm feeling some feelings. That's totally legitimate. And since this is a remothering conference, the remothering moment is saying, oh, sweetie, that is uncomfortable. And then the self-reflection to say, wow, these people were not expecting to lose this family member. They have so many other things going on in their minds right now. This experience is not about me, and it is not a reflection on what they think of me at all. And so, but what really happened was this person was it just created ripples of strife in this family system because there was so much offense there. So does that recap it in a way that is
Yeah,
helpful?
that's a great example, because you can see how it was in their eyes, it was all about them because they weren't the most important person in the interaction. And maybe we'll talk about this at some point later, but that is really a devastating trigger for these people, because when they don't do these defensive, self-protective things like be the center of attention, keep the focus on them, make sure that other people sort of beef them up and help them manage their emotions and help them manage their self-esteem. When that is not going on and they are thrown back just on doing something inside, like when you did the remothering gesture, holding your chest and patting it, that's what they can't do.
Mm.
You would never see a 3-year-old, unless they had been extensively coached, doing that for themselves. They would run to somebody else, right? Okay, with
Mm.
a story about how somebody else had done something to them. Okay, that because that's how it looks to them. It's how it looks if you're very egocentric, like they are. So when they get into a place where they can't do those things, like you can't be the center of attention at a funeral or a wedding or Christmas or whatever, it's just you're not the main point. when that happens with them, they experience this terrible existential annihilation feeling. It's that bad for them. And so when they
Which
get
explains some of their really extreme
yeah.
reactions. And something you said last time that I want to bring forward this time is just because we can understand where they're coming from does not mean we are responsible. And it doesn't mean they're not accountable. It just means we're understanding where they're coming from.
Yeah, we're not feeling as confused when we
Yes, not as yes, thank
yeah,
you for naming that. Not as confused. And
yeah.
that actually maybe helps me bring us a little bit into the disentangling. But I just want to underline one piece that I want to name, which is in this story I shared about the funeral. What's interesting is, and I think that so many folks listening could probably relate to this. Sometimes it's not this overt, like that it's obvious that the person wants to be the center of attention. Sometimes it is, but it really shows up when they're not, or the roles that people are supposed to play around them aren't happening. I think we can all think of people that are overtly like, look at me, but it's that's not what emotional maturity specific. I mean, yes, that person is also emotionally immature, but that's not the when you talk about it being about them, it's not center of
Yeah.
attention about them kind
Yeah,
of.
thank you for that because that's a good clarification to make a point of. Yeah, egocentrism doesn't mean the same thing as being grandiose. Okay.
Mm,
So people with a narcissistic flavor, they will channel that into a kind of a grandiosity, like I should be the one that everyone's paying attention to. And what's the matter with you that you aren't recognizing me as the greatest thing? That's a narcissistic twist on this. But you can be not narcissistic, but still just be like, well, of course, what I want to do and what I do is just fine. Like,
mm.
well, I mean, it would be counterintuitive to think otherwise. I mean, I mean,
Oh.
it can be very benign feeling like that. It can be like the parent who, does things and as long as they think they're doing just fine, they don't check it out with their kids and say, "Honey, how's it going?" or "Is this too much for you?" or "Is this not enough for you?" No, because they're feeling okay. So,
Mm.
the world is feeling okay, which incidentally brings me to just another point I wanted to mention about the emotionally mature person, and that is that their relationship with reality is it's not that reality is out there and they have to either adapt to it for what it is or they have to adjust something inside themselves to deal with the reality. Instead, they have conflicts with reality
Mm.
and they will use quite primitive defenses to get away from a confrontation with reality. It's
Mm.
kind of like, I'm too fragile to fight this. So, how about if we just deny, dismiss, or distort what just happened?
Wow. Wow. As you're listening, you can pause, you can rewind, and you can re-listen to that if that struck you the way it just struck me. And ooh, that's big. And
It,
explains so much about the behaviors.
it's huge because they, just like a little child who says, "No, I didn't. No, you didn't," or blows you off because they don't want to listen to that. That's what they do. And they also, unfortunately, use their feelings, their emotions as their guide to reality. So, for instance, this person in your example, they get triggered into what I bet was an existential annihilation crisis. Am I still here if no one's looking at me? That's an
Yeah.
existential crisis. Okay. So with that person, because it felt to them like everybody was moving away from them or had their backs turned to them, figuratively speaking, it felt that way to them probably because of their triggers with their upbringing, right?
I can
Okay.
guess, but
Yeah, but they wouldn't be processing that. Oh, I've been triggered. They wouldn't know what it was, and they would just say that's reality. They would then project blame on people for ignoring them because it felt that way to them. If I feel ignored, you ignored me, even if it didn't happen, you know? And a
or
lot,
even if it did, in this case,
yeah,
then it was understandable. One
yeah,
of the things that you just said though about existential crisis, and I want to underline this because you already named this. I just want to name it again. We all have those moments, and we don't always remember to turn to the remothering moment and say, "We're, oh, I've got this." Sometimes we forget we don't turn to our tools, and we feel those feelings, and we may even go into moments of blame, a lot of times acting in, sometimes acting out. This is a normal human experience. That's uncomfortable. I just a cringy moment when you're like, oh, I just did that thing. That's the biggest difference, I would say. And I just want to make sure I'm reflecting your meaning well and correctly. But just because when people are listening, it's not that humans don't have those existential moments and remember to reach for those tools every time. It's can you sometimes remember to reach the tools? Can you eventually self-reflect? Can you lean into repair later? All of these things.
yeah. And
We learn
what a helping.
forward. Can you learn forward first?
Yeah. But it's like what a wonderful tool it is to be able to have a terrible feeling like that, or even like the shadow or the preview of a feeling like that. And at the same time to realize, oh, I'm feeling abandoned, or oh, I'm feeling like I've been cut loose from the human race or something like that. That's my stuff. That's,
Yes.
yes, that's what I felt like as a little kid. I mean, because it pulls you back into reality. Okay, the
Mm,
present reality is that you are tethered, you do have yourself, you just forgot it for a second.
yes.
Yeah,
Or you haven't yet learned it, but you're here at the Remothering Masterclass and you are learning it. And the fact that
absolutely.
that you're curious is really everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, So it's interesting. I'm going to just take a breath. And while I take a breath and integrate all that we just heard, I'd like to invite everybody listening to do the same and just notice what's feeling important so far. This was all the juicy foundation for what we're about to talk about. But hopefully there are some sparks of, oh, and what are those for you right now as we get ready to talk about disentangling? And I think the first place, well, I wasn't planning to go here first, but the first place I'd like to talk about is our own journeys of emotional maturing. So I'm gonna have a sip of water. I'm gonna adjust in my chair. I'm gonna shake it out. Invite folks listening to do the same because that was not a full book's worth of information in one sitting, but it was a real overview. So I thank you for grounding us in that. And wow, that was good and big. And wow, I want to hit on the maturing because for those of us that didn't have emotional maturity modeled for us, and we are picking it up as we go and we're learning as adults, as we're listening to you talk, one, I want to just underline like, welcome to the human experience. That's all of us. And also, cool, we're here at the remothering masterclass. So we're all learning to up level our emotional maturity. And one of the things you said in this book that I really loved is that we are emotionally maturing and it's not an end destination. It's something that we're on a path to. So let me just take a peek at some of my questions. I guess I'd like to just start there. For those of us that are hearing this and we're like, oh my gosh, I have done that, either for ourselves. This is a many part question, either ourselves or at work or if we're parents and we realize we've leaked some of our old material onto our kids.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a really good place to talk about the difference between an emotionally immature person losing emotional control or doing something that probably at some level they regret, acting out in some way, and a more emotionally mature person, adequately emotionally mature person, how they each look at what they might think back on as bad behavior. Okay.
That'd be great.
Yeah, because the emotionally immature person is going to take care of their bad feelings by looking back on the bad behavior as something that they were forced into. Like, it wasn't their fault. If this person hadn't done this thing to upset them, if the kid hadn't refused to listen, they would never have, fill in the blank. They tend to blame, and as a way of not having to confront things about themselves that they regret, because they don't have that self-reflection, right? But the other thing is that because they're so emotionally unmodulated and unregulated, if they get anywhere near shame or guilt, I mean, think how devastating a real moment of genuine guilt or shame is, even to a sufficiently emotionally mature person. It feels terrible. You
It
feel
does.
terrible about yourself, right? Okay, they're not equipped to handle that. Just like the 4-year-old is not equipped to handle that. If they let themselves go into that, they would be annihilated. They just can't go there. So what we have to realize is that sometimes the difference between adequate emotional maturity in a parent, say, and bona fide emotional immaturity is what you do next. Okay? Like, a mature person and an immature person can have very similar behavior. But what happens is that the adequately emotionally mature person will be able to go back in time, just like you did with your little friend. They'll be able to go back in time, revisit it, reflect on it, realize what they did, and make amends. Come back and say, honey, I'm so sorry. I lost my cool. It wasn't your fault. I was having a bad day, but I shouldn't have taken it out on you. I'm so sorry.
Mm.
Okay. And then you wait to see what the kid's reaction is. Does the kid need to stay withdrawn for a little bit longer? Do they look like they want to make up? They want to receive your apology. So you take that kid's subjective experience into account. You see the reality of
Mm.
that.
What I'm
They're,
hearing you say actually sparks a cringy one from me is that because of my own personal history, this sounds kind of silly, but I had no idea about adult apologizing to a kid. Like I didn't know that was a thing. And so my kids were pretty young and I was talking to my daughter. I'm like, so I'm practicing this thing. I'm sorry you feel that way, which is
uh-huh,
of course, and
uh-huh.
this was my daughter, my youngest child. She turned to me and she's, Mom, you get a negative Z for communication, like not even an A, not even a C, like a negative Z, because it's not about how, however you just said that felt really terrible.
Oh my gosh.
And so what I'm hearing you say is the maturing, as we're emotionally maturing, we're going to hear things like that feedback and be like, okay, needs improvement.
Yeah. So what was your response? Do you remember when she
I'm
said
sure
that?
I laughed and I was like, I think you're right. I don't know how to do it. I'll get back to you. Would a hug feel okay right now if I don't have the right words? Something probably along those
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Um,
Because all it's not complicated. All you have to do is acknowledge, what they're feeling, apologize, be regretful for it, apologize, and take your lumps, and
Get a negative C for
yeah,
that.
and that's what you did. And then see, you have a very mature coping mechanism there because you thought it was funny. So a very high coping mechanism, because when you can transform reality without getting rid of reality, without saying it didn't happen, or but you can take the same reality, your child gives you the C minus, and you turn it into something hilarious. Now you are dealing with reality in a way that promotes
Mm.
growth.
So
Okay.
that's really helping me to have that clean distinction, which is which is something you said. I'm just gonna have to leave my glasses on the rest of this time, which is confronting reality something that we can do, or does that put up massive defenses where we just shrapnel on everybody else and start going blame, 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 blame? That seems like a really important distinction. Am I getting that
Yeah,
right?
it's amazing how similar people are. I mean, it isn't like some people do this one whole set of coping mechanisms and then somebody else over here has a whole different set. No, there's like a ladder. And people who are emotionally immature tend to use the same rather primitive reality distorting or reality denying defenses. And people who are adequately mature tend to find ways to transform or reinterpret the situation, not like reframing, like I'm going to make this into something positive. It's not as superficial as that. It's deeper. It's like taking the reality as it is and, finding humor in it. Or I'm just going to suppress this because I can't think about it right now. That's another.
Oh, I've had to do that. Like, mommy needs a timeout. I'm gonna
Yeah.
need at least 5 minutes all by myself in my bedroom. And
Yes.
please don't come in because I really just need some time to breathe. And then we're gonna discuss it afterwards.
Yeah,
And
and see that's you taking into account your psychological reality as mom at that moment.
yeah.
You
Oh,
need,
though there were times that there was no laughter. There was just like, you're not wrong, but mommy needs a timeout. Mommy needs some
absolutely.
alone time.
Yes, because that's part of the reality. I mean, given what's happening, that is part of the reality that we have to deal with. And you needed to take yourself for some quiet time to regroup.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh dear. Let
But
me see where.
Simona, if I may, there's
Yes.
there's another point to this though. It's
Yeah.
that when you step in it or you do something that later you may realize that you wish you hadn't, if you recognize that and you come back, you actually build emotional intimacy with your child and you actually build
Mm.
trust. I mean, real trust. Like, real trust is when one of us does something wrong or does something that hurts the other, things start getting
Mm.
dicey in the relationship somehow. What do you do then? That's an interesting thing to find out about somebody. So your kids are always checking out whether or not they can trust you. Because for a little kid, this little person new to the planet, they need to know what is safe. That is
Mm.
job number one. Survival is job number one. And that is usually in some form the relationship with the attachment person. So when you
Mm.
go back and rebuild that bridge to them, now, I mean, imagine how that feels to the little kid at some levels. Oh, that was awful what happened. And then mom was able to build us a bridge back to each other. Oh,
Mm.
that's what you do when that, terrible break occurs. You start building a bridge back
Mm.
to each. Okay, got it. So it's a very important, like you were talking about modeling earlier, it's a very important kind of modeling that we do when we make mistakes. And there's a wonderful book by Ed Tronick called The Power of Discord. I don't know if you're familiar with
I'm
it.
not familiar with this book. I'm familiar with, and I would name, if someone wanted to just Google, there's a 5-minute video on the flat face experiments that he did that it's real interesting. But yeah, so
Yeah,
the power of,
The Power of Discord. And his
yeah.
and his thesis is that that is the basis of developing trust. Not that mom or
Mm.
dad is always there and always responds and you're building trust like you're building a brick wall. This is more like every time the brick wall gets blown over, mom or dad picks up a trowel and some cement and puts it back together again.
It's the micro repairs and the it's all the repairs that creates the strength and relationship, not the never having discord in the first place. Getting that
Absolutely
right?
right. Yep. Yep.
Nice. And what I love about what you just named is that repair, which applies to all of our relationships, whether we're parents or our friendships or work relationships, when we're with adequately mature people, and this is one of the ways that we can figure out who in our lives is and is not adequately mature. We can flow through that harmony, disharmony, repair, and back to harmony, if I'm recapping that correctly.
Yes.
See what juicy places we could go next. You have questions about disentangling from the emotional traps, but before we go there, I wonder if you could paint a picture for us of what it looks like on the other side of having disentangled from emotionally immature people. And not, when I say disentangled, I'm not specifically talking contact, no contact. I'm talking about disentangling from the emotional traps that we find ourselves in when on the other side of this work. Can you paint a picture of what you've seen so there's some hope and we know what to look forward to and what that's going to feel and look like?
Yeah, I mean, and there really is hope. I mean, personal growth really happens, and therapy really works, and support groups really work, and mentors really work. I mean, there are all these things that help us as we disentangle from these earlier relationships with emotionally immature people, where we have felt like we exist to serve their psychological
Yes.
needs, okay, and that they are the most important person in the relationship.
Oh
And
my God.
they
Yeah.
keep us entangled with them emotionally by using a couple things: emotional takeovers, which is when they get so upset that they, actually flood you with their affect, and you just feel taken over, you feel stunned, you feel, dead in the water, you can't think, you are not in touch with yourself anymore. Half the time you're kind of dissociated or immobilized by the fear that you feel in response to their, intense
Or
feeling.
one of the other pieces, this is one of my signature moves, moving into helper fixer.
Yeah, yeah, because it is so scary to be around somebody who is emotionally dysregulating. And if it's your parent, that's freaky. I mean, you do not want to see your parent lose it. That's terrifying. And it's just an awful feeling. So you can be tangled up in them when they do this emotional takeover, and then everything becomes an emergency about their feelings. And, they can call you at 3 o'clock in the morning, or they can insist that you do this thing right now. You get taken over by their urgency. You can also be emotionally coerced. And by that, I mean, they make you feel ashamed or guilty or flat out fear, afraid, or you start to doubt yourself. That gets into kind of the
There's
gaslighting
that
thing.
crushing guilt, that
Yeah.
obligation that I'm
Yeah.
not going to be a good child to my,
Yeah.
parent.
And the other interesting
I'm going
thing
to
is
disappoint them.
that, right, but the obligation has this moral component to it. It's not just that you should do this. This moral dimension is put on it, so that you are morally obligated, if you want to be a good person, to do this thing that I'm telling you I need you to do, and not to complain about it, because if you complain about it, you're being selfish,
Mm.
and you're not thinking about other people, and there's something the matter with you, and you're cold and you're not loving, and, which is one of the reasons why a lot of emotionally mature, but they're children of emotionally immature people, why a lot of those people end up with fears that like they're not capable of true love, they
Mm.
don't do enough for other people, they're not good enough people. It's because they've been burdened with these really unfair and unrealistically high moral obligations, because it's such an effective control technique. And the
Eh,
longer the emotionally immature person can feel in control,
Yeah.
the stronger they feel inside.
I wonder if we can pull on that thread for a second, because that's a theme I've heard so many times. And it's interesting because I'm hearing you say the words of that's emotional coercion, and that's actually not correct, that you are not morally obligated to do this to be a good person. And having both been on my own journey for 20 years, I do this work for a living, and yet still I'm hearing those words. A lot of me believes you, and some of me does not. And I wonder if you can explain a little bit more, not just for me. I'm imagining I'm not the only person who's hearing those words with me. Like, how is that not being a good child? How is that not what good people do? So I wonder, can you say the same thing that you just said again? And I don't know how else to say it in a way that I'll digest
Yeah,
it a little bit more.
yeah, I think what you're saying is, and this is one of those things that snags us, because we can say, okay, I'm not going to be, hornswoggled into feeling morally obligated, and we get like all confident, and then it's, well, wait a minute, what am I saying here? Because maybe that is what it means to be good, to give to other people, to be unselfish, to self-sacrifice, and you start thinking, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I am selfish, maybe I don't know how to love. Like, maybe if I was a better person, I would feel like doing it. But the issue is that if we have sufficient experiences of attachment and we have sufficient resources emotionally in our relationships, say with our parents growing up, people automatically, this is so beautiful, people automatically want to give to other people. They rush towards situations where they can be of help. They like being involved. They like trying to make people feel better. So it's a very human instinct to go toward someone's suffering with empathy and try to make that better. That's altruism. It's a very, very basic human thing. But what happens with emotionally immature people is that because of their egocentrism and their lack of self-reflection, they keep doing it and doing it and doing it until you are exhausted. You are drained. You don't want to hear from them. You don't want to give them more of your time and more of your energy, because it never goes anywhere. Nothing changes. They never get filled up. They never reach a point where they say, thank you, sweetie, I've got it now. And you can have that satisfying feeling of, oh, I helped dad or I helped mom. Now I can feel good about myself. There's no reward system in this when you're dealing with an emotionally immature person. It's
Just
just more of,
punishment. If you don't do it, you'll be mischaracterized and talked about behind your back, or you'll be disappointing somebody, or all the things.
yeah,
You'll
right.
be
And
the receiving end of defenses.
yes, exactly. And then it's kind of like, and what have you done for me lately? You're never done. You're never done with an emotionally immature person. So that's why you don't feel like doing stuff for them. Okay, look at the dynamic of the relationship and look at the reciprocity in the relationship. How often are you able to go to them with stuff that's going on with you, especially emotional stuff, and receive some kind of attention and help from them? Okay, I bet it's not very often. And yet they extol the benefit and the obligation of self-sacrifice as being what makes you a good person. So I sort of think that maybe we ought to dispense with the moral judgment about what is good, okay, and take self-sacrifice out of the equation for being a good person, and instead conceptualize goodness in a person as something that leads to more life and growth in some form. Okay. And instead of, I'm cutting off body parts and putting them in a basket for you because I'm so good that I'm self-sacrificing. It's like that children's book, The Giving Tree. Kind of, kind of a disturbing story, but anyway. But that is very much what happens in that dynamic with the emotionally immature parent.
Thank you for bringing it back around again, and saying it again. And I'd like to invite everybody listening, as you were hearing that, if that was a sticking point for you, and it may or may not have been, but if you were one of the folks that joined me in that being a sticky point, Did that help you hear it differently, see it differently? Were you able to take it in even 1% more or 5% more? And I'd just like to invite folks listening to notice that one. Yes, for me, that was really helpful as you were saying that. It's interesting. I have many, I call it the wise inner council of the many me's. I have many me's in there between my ears. And a lot of them were hearing it and agreeing the first time. And a few of them were able to hear it the second time. So thank you for that. They all know each other. I don't mean to suggest that. It's just for those that are more into neuroscience, the cells and circuits all have their own implicit knowings. And I like to personify them and call them the wise inner council of the many me's. But if we want to just stick to science, these are the cells and circuits of my neural pathways that know certain things from in my implicit memory and certain behaviors that show up, thought habits that show up. And but for me, it works best to collaborate with them by personifying them.
Yeah, I agree. I was awake at 3 o'clock in the morning. I had a bunch of stuff to do, and I was calling my counsel. Okay, who's scared in there? Let's hear it. We're here for you.
We're here for you. Oh, that's great. That's great. So I'm going to have another sip of tea and I'm going to take a breath and take it in.
I did want to say one other thing
Yeah,
about getting
please.
disentangled.
Yeah.
Because I was mentioning the things that entangle us with
Yes.
emotionally immature people.
Yes.
And that make it hard for us to break out of that because we end up feeling like bad people. So then we don't even try. And then we get very passive, or we get very immobilized. We develop a kind of a learned helplessness. What's the point of struggling against this? Let me just bite the bullet and give in, kind of thing. But the answer to it is to turn your attention back to yourself, and back to the realization that your individuation, you becoming your own person, aware of and dealing with your own feelings and needs, being self-protective, being sensitive to yourself and empathic to yourself, just like we're joking about the many me's, but
Yeah.
that is solid stuff when you show that kind of empathy to the parts of yourself, because now you are there for yourself, and you're not going to fall prey to the next person who pays some attention to you and yet wants something from you, or wants to pull you in or entangle you in their stuff. So that individuation and that relationship with yourself, that self connection, that is the cure, so to speak, of the being entangled. That is the disentanglement. You need to be able to become yourself, touch base with your true self, who's kind of the CEO of the many me's in there, and be able to be your own person, to have a place to stand. Let's see, the old Greek mathematician or who said, give me a place to stand and I and my lever will move the world. This principle of leverage, that's what we're doing, is when we individuate, when we make that self-connection, that and build that sense of self, now we have a place to stand from which to live our life, and also to protect ourselves from some of these, frankly, exploitative kinds of moves by the emotionally immature people. We're always trying to get people to take care of them psychologically.
Wow. Part of me wants to ask folks listening what they just heard and what's feeling important. And part of me wants to take it to another level and say, and what's the hope, that feeling on the other side? Because it's not like the other person is going to change. Oh, they may, but unlikely.
They may. We don't have a crystal ball. They may. It's I don't think it's a terribly frequent occurrence that they do, because everything is set up to stay the same in terms of what their defenses are trying to do. They're not looking to learn and grow and change. They're looking to keep themselves together.
Mm.
That's the main goal. But what it looks like on the other side is it's a feeling of freedom. It's a
Mm.
feeling of getting free, almost like free of your brainwashing. Oh, okay. I see now that what I was taught to believe isn't the reality. It isn't the whole world. That's somebody's idea that they wanted me to follow. But I see that that's not true now. It's like the world is round, not flat. Wow. And so there's a sense of getting free. People describe feeling freer, lighter, more energy, more themselves. They know what they feel and think now. Because before you get disentangled, you can't think half a thought before you're feeling guilty or worried about what they'll think about what you just thought or how they'll feel about how you're feeling. I mean,
Mm.
it's so in there that people don't have the freedom to
Mm.
really let themselves think their thoughts, have their feelings, be themselves. No way. They're supposed to be there for the emotionally immature person's needs. That's the beginning and end of it. I wish I could pull out my files and just read some of the things that people end up saying when they're getting toward the end of their therapy. But that's the gist of it. It's that, well,
Mm.
people say it's transformative. That's the word they use over and over again.
Mm.
Transformative, I feel free. I see what's going on. I feel myself. I can be myself. I don't
Mm.
fall into these fears of not doing what other people think I should. They feel like grown-ups, but not in a stuffy way. It's
In
in
a
an
free,
autonomous
just a
way.
free. So there were some questions that I didn't get a chance to ask you that I want to point folks to this book about. And also there's other information in this remothering masterclass, which is in your disentangling book. There's a lot of normalizing and this is other people's experiences, and you read that and you're like, holy smoke. So talking about things like the feelings that could come up, the feelings of guilt, the feelings of anger, the feelings of obligation, and all of that, we some of the stuff we just talked on, and then also some of the adaptations that show up, the adaptations like reflexive caretaking or hyper independence that comes from the discomfort and asking for help, or perfectionism, achievement orientation, people pleasing. So all of those things have their own chapters and their own strategies. We talk about some of that in this masterclass if people want to go deeper. But so I guess I just want to bring that forward to just normalize that if we come from a personal history that has potentially, I don't want to name anybody else's experience. I'm reluctant to say if your parent was an emotionally immature parent, but I guess we can just straight up say if you had some of those experiences and you have some of the circumstances and adaptations that you're now navigating because of that, well, you and 1 million other people, we're not alone, and there are solutions. So I just take comfort in knowing that's it's nice to have descriptions and you're like, oh, I get that. That's me. And so I had questions about that, but I think since people can read, I don't know if there's something you want to say short about that. And then I have one other question that's not in there.
Yeah, I do want to say something about that because I do think it's very important for us to normalize. Well, first of all, you have to see it and you have to see it, you have to name it, okay? And then understand where it came from, and that
Mm.
normalizes it. Then it's okay, this is what I've been trained to do, or this is how I've been trained to think, so therefore I do these things. And you can actually self reflect on it in such a way that you begin to stand back from those reflexive behaviors, like you mentioned, like the people pleasing or putting other people's needs first, or being afraid to say something because you're so exquisitely empathic toward other people. Actually, you're scared that that person's going to get mad at you.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I thought I was just being good. I didn't realize my
Well, you
emotional
are.
management behavior was
Well,
also
you know,
keeping
but
me safe.
yeah, but there, I mean, there is real altruism in it, because if you have empathy, something wanting to take care of someone else, that is real altruism. It's just that when you make yourself give up something essential to your own well-being in order to do it, now we have a problem.
Mhm.
And when that behavior also becomes compulsive, meaning I don't have a choice in whether I do it or not, I reflexively, that's what that means. I don't have a choice. I compulsively take care of other people, or people please, or reflexive caretaking. Once you begin to realize what you're doing, and you realize that that's coming from the impact of having been trained to take such care with this person who is always ready to project blame, is always ready to be heard. When you realize that, you begin to have choice back about how you respond in situations. It then becomes, I need to think about that. Can I get back to you? It means that you have the presence of mind again to give yourself a moment to consult with how you feel, and also what it's going to cost you. That
Mm.
is so important. That's a very high level coping mechanism, by the way. It's called anticipation. Not only can I imagine what's going to happen as a result of my doing this or giving into this demand, not only can
Mm.
I figure out how that's probably going to go down in the future, I can tell you how it's going to feel to me. So I
Mm.
can time travel and emotionally imagine what it's going to feel like if I take this on. And now it's 3 weeks from now and I'm stuck in this thing.
Mm.
Okay. So you begin to get that. That's why when you grow and you begin to develop these higher order coping mechanisms, you develop choice. That's part of the freedom.
Mm.
I have the choice about how I respond to things.
There's so
Oh,
much hope in that. I'm looking at the time. There's this tiny question. It's a bit controversial. I'm not famous like you're famous, but I may have reached the next tiny level because I finally have my first online troll attack.
oh
Because
no.
I wrote this post. It was talking about the small paper cut size, plausibly deniable, some of the things that happen between an adult child and their emotionally mature parent. And the first shot was, you should be so lucky that those are your only complaints. But then I got a lot more, and it was interesting because originally I left them so people could see there is big response from other people projecting when someone talks about these seemingly minor paper cut size slights that are really not so minor. But then I realized people would be reading almost verbal emotional violence without expecting to. So I had to change my policy to say, if you're going to post, it has to be not name calling and it can't be. But yeah, I was surprised how much intensity came at me over talking about minor, plausibly deniable paper cut size slights in relationship with an emotionally immature person. And I wonder if there's anything that you want to say about that or can say to folks listening, because
Yeah.
if it caused that much intensity, I imagine it's a topic.
Yeah. I just, the first thing I want to say about that is that it really is a thing of death by 1,000 cuts. Yeah. Don't kill you right away. But if we ding away at you constantly and frequently enough, there is a cumulative effect of these things. What I always tell people in therapy, and of course, adult children of emotionally immature parents are famous in my book for coming in and saying, well, this thing happened, but it's so small. I feel guilty about even bringing it up. There's so many other people who have much more important things to talk about. They could be in here getting help from you. And here I am bringing in this silly little, and I'm like, wait a minute. The ground rule here is there is no small thing. This gets to an almost spiritual, existential level. that when a person disrespects another person and makes that cut, there is not only just the matter of what they said and how that hurt. They are treating you like a thing. It becomes an I-it relationship instead of the I-thou relationship. That's Martin Buber, a philosopher. That's his concept of, we can have I-it relationships and I-thous. And there's another book called The Primal Wound, which says that it's that I-it relationship that kills us inside. To be treated like, and they date this back to the origins of a person's addiction, mental illness. But they say the primal wound is not how bad the abuse was. The primal wound was, I treat you like a thing. And that's what Papercuts are about. Papercuts are about relating to a person in a way that shows that they don't experience you as psychologically real. They don't experience you or take you in as a person with a real inner world. Your essence, your individuality, your little flame that's the you of you is treated like it doesn't matter. So that's why these things are so important. And that's why I say there are no small things. I bet my bottom dollar that every one of these that people end up talking about is going to have that element in it, because it is so profoundly invalidating of your existence. So I just want to say that we feel it in a big way. It drains us. It sucks the energy and the air right out of us, because to be treated that way is, it just invalidates your very existence and says to you, you're not important, you're not real. I don't have to, treat you nicely. I don't have to pay attention to you. I don't have to, I'll just say whatever I want. And then there's something wrong with you if you object to that, or if you have feelings about that. So yeah, I'm with you. I mean, I think that the Papercuts are the basis of this whole rotten framework of treating other people like they don't matter.
Wow. Dr. Gibson and everybody listening, can't believe we're at time, but we're at time. There was so much here. Thank you so much for sharing so generously of your wisdom, your time. Your area of expertise is just continues to reverberate in my life in ways that are magical.
Oh, it's been wonderful being here.
So grateful. Lindsay, thank you so very much. Is there anything, as we're saying goodbye, that you want to make sure folks heard or leave you with? They'll be able to find you. I keep pointing to your books and on the speaker page, but is there any wrapped up thread that wants to be said before we say goodbye?
I'll just mention a couple of things, and then I'll see if there's a wrap up in there somewhere. That if people want to find me on social media, I do a lot of work with the Academy of Self-Help. So that is on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, other sites. And then I have a journal, a guided journal for adult children of emotionally immature parents, and that's coming out April 1st. So that's
so by the time people are listening to this, it will be out in the world.
I tried to do it so that it was interactional in a way so that we got into things that I just felt were a little different from most journaling in the directions that we went in. So I'm very happy with that book. But anyway,
nice. Very excited to check it out.
By way of wrapping up, I just want to say that, and this kind of goes back to the Papercuts, but we know there's something in us that knows when we are being treated in a way that promotes our growth and our health, and when we are not. I don't know why this thing is so well developed in us. I guess it's what the life force demands, for us to flourish and thrive. But we absolutely can tell. For instance, if you think about when you use the metaphor of the paper cut, I mean, just think of how a paper cut feels. You're aware of it all the time. I mean, it's, yes, physically, it may seem like a little thing, but it captures our attention. We can't be okay completely if there's any part of us that's hurt. We don't say to ourselves, oh, it's only my stomach that's upset. The rest of me is fine. When something's wrong with some part of you, you feel it all over. And it commands your attention. And the reason that it does that is it's saying to you, hey, this is bad for your life force. Pay attention to this. So I just urge people that are listening to pay attention to this stuff. Pay attention to the what you're trying to bring to people with your remothering, which I just think is fantastic. I think it's the answer. Pay attention to that, because there's something inside you that will guide you toward what it is that you need. And I guarantee you it's not to ignore it and decide that it's no big thing.
Wow. So folks, as we were getting ready to say goodbye to Lindsay, I'd like to invite you to notice what you're pulling for yourself from this conversation, what's feeling important. Maybe if you've been taking notes, to take a glance back through the notes, or if you haven't been taking notes, no shoulds. Travel in time and just think about the conversation you just heard and what's feeling really important. And as you're noticing that, what is something that you want to take with you into tomorrow? Taking that and taking an action with that, or how do you want to apply that to your life moving forward? And with that, I'm so deeply grateful, honored. What an absolute delight and privilege, and so many good things to have this conversation. Thank you so much, Lindsay. It's been a treat, a treat.
Thank you so much, Simona. I loved it.